Hello everyone, JRDO96 is here back again with a new creepypasta. Today we're going to be doing Squidward's Suicide. This is pretty much one of my personal favorite creepypastas I ever read, and I would like to share it with my viewers here, and let's begin. I just want to start off by saying, if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course, most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would go crazy over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it without giving it too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and then the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity. So it took them longer to start up the season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and two other interns were in the editing room along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received a copy that was supposed to be Fear for Krabby Patty, and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that it isn't final yet, animators often put a mock title card, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, oftentimes lewd titles such as How Sex Doesn't Work, instead of Rockabye Bivlov, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but work-related chuckles. So when we saw the title card, Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think of more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music plays as it is normal. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him and to keep it down, as he has a concert that night that he needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up, and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things began to seem off. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound isn't synced up with animation, so yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There is a slight murmuring in the crowd before they began to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing that is common in the show, but you could clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in center frame, and he is too booing. Very much unlike him. That isn't the oddest thing, though. What is odd is everyone had hyper-realistic eyes. Very detailed. Clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other like obviously confused, but since we were in the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. The shot goes to Squidward on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is the night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is that at this point, there is no sound. Literally no sound. Not even a feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status showed them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking. In the silence for about 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly. He put his hands or tentacles over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while, a sound in the background, very slow, growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through the forest. The screen slowly begins to zoom on his face, but by slow I mean it's only noticeable if you look at shots 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists on itself for a split second, then go back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe, as if the storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part of this sound and Squidward's sobbing sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but the speakers were holes. The sound was coming through for the other side. As good as this sound is, as the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good to produce sound of that quality. Below the sound of the wind sobbing very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had a hard time pinning it. We watched the show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I have time to think about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and then twitched violently as something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He could have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied, one eye dangling over his upturned face popped. He was naked down to his underwear. His stomach cruelly open and his entrails laying beside him. He was lying on some pavement that was probably on a road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of a photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence tags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem that the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but pressed on, hoping that it was just a sick joke. The scream flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing louder than before, and half body and frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it, you'll get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if it was that of a gale blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches, the laughing of the deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back, as we all were, but we knew he had to. This time the photo appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was lying on her stomach, her bralettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped out and popped, naked except for underwear. Her entrails were piled on top of her, above her another crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street, and the photographer's shadow was visible. Very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit, and one in turn and the only female ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after this second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound. Like it was when this scene started. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism, like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen as if watching the viewer. After 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud. The most fear-inducing of all of his sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. And this time the still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and backed up. This time the photo was of a boy, about the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were just being pulled out of from the stomach wound by a large hand. The right eye popped and dangling, blood trickling down it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. He went on to the next, same thing. He went back to the first and played him quicker, and I lost it. I vomited on the floor, the animating and sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if there were 5 different photos. They were played out as if they were frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had called the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called down here. So the editor just continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming, all sound again stopped, Squidward was just staring at the viewer, full frame at the face, for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out, and a deep voice said, "Do it!" And we see Squidward's hands in his hand a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters the wall behind him and his bed, and he flies back with a force. The last 5 seconds of this episode show his body on the bed. On his side, one eye dangling of what is left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg is obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the hell was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it's just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry it unstayed. The only theory we could think of was the file was edited by someone in the chain, from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called to analyze what had happened. The analysis of the file did show that it was edited over new material. However, the timestamp was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches. As if the timestamp may have glitched showed the wrong time, but everything checked fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child was identified, and no clues were gathered from the data involved, no physical clues in the photos. I never believed in an unexplainable phenomenon before, but now that I have something happen, and I can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things. So this was Squidward Suicide. It's pretty unique that it has that sense of being creepy. Well, I have watched SpongeBob when I was a young kid, and there was some things that were kind of like creepy on its own right, but it's just what makes it so unique is the use of hyper-realistic blood and hyper-realistic eyes in this particular episode of SpongeBob. It's kind of makes it more eerie and makes it look more interesting to see what the hell's going on. Like, why do they have realistic eyes? And to be honest with you, is this real? Would this be real if this was a particular lost episode of SpongeBob? If it was, someone could have leaked it on the internet for everyone to see, and the SpongeBob series would be completely over, with no chance in hell for a comeback. So what do you think about this? Do you think it's real or not? And what things would you change in this creepypasta to make this even better? This was JRDL96. If you like what you saw, comment, like, and subscribe for more creepypastas. This is JRDL96 once again, and I'm out. And yes, I said creepypastas. You know why? That's what they are.